I'm a 34-year-old software developer, and compared to the rest of my family, I earn a lot more. My mother is a retired music teacher, and my dad runs a local hardware store. I also have a younger sister, Catherine, who's 30, but we haven't spoken in 5 years. Catherine has always been difficult, spoiled, and entitled. My parents never did much to address her behavior, and I tolerated it for years. But 5 years ago, things hit a breaking point. I had just moved into a new apartment and was excited to host Christmas dinner. Catherine, true to form, ruined it by making snide comments about how small and outdated my place was and how it wasn't in a great neighborhood. She kept bragging about her boyfriend, who lived in a mansion 10 times the size of my apartment. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her that, unlike her boyfriend, I was paying my own rent without any help from our parents, something she couldn't say for herself. I made it clear that if she had such high standards, she could leave my house and not come back. They both left, and we haven't spoken since. My parents have tried to get us to reconcile, but I've had enough. Recently, I found out she's engaged to that same boyfriend, and they're getting married in a few months. My parents, against all reason, decided to cover the cost of the wedding venue and decor, trying to keep up with the groom's wealthy parents. It was a foolish move, since my sister's taste is far beyond their budget, but they committed to it anyway. Now, with the wedding approaching, my parents realized they can't afford it and came to me for a loan. Despite our improved relationship in recent years, I had to say no. The reason I'm sharing this is to get some perspective on whether I did the right thing. Some relatives are calling me petty, but I don't see it that way. When I was about to graduate high school and start college, my parents told me they wouldn't be covering my tuition or any expenses because at 18, I was on my own. They said they wanted me to build resilience and independence, just like they did. They hadn't set aside any money for me or my sister, and I was left to figure it out on my own. My course was tough, and I didn't want to jeopardize my grades by working while studying. College isn't cheap, and the costs were overwhelming. I suggested taking out a student loan, but my parents flatly refused. They were adamant about not borrowing money, saying it went against their principles. Even when I suggested borrowing from relatives and paying them back later, they found the idea insulting. We argued about it a lot, but eventually I managed to get my grandparents to co-sign a student loan for me, which is how I made it through college. I was furious with my parents at the time, but over the years, I forgave them. That doesn't mean I forgot. My sister never had to deal with this issue because she didn't even bother with college. She always planned to take over Dad's business or get married, which is exactly what she's doing now. The thing that bothers me most is how my parents stuck to their principles when it came to my education, refusing to borrow money. But now, with Catherine's wedding on the horizon, those principles seem to have conveniently disappeared. It feels like they've forgotten the struggle they put me through, all because they want to fund a grand wedding. When they asked me for financial help, I reminded them of what they had said about loans and borrowing money. They were taken aback. I don't think they expected me to remember all of it after so many years. But I did, and I remember it well. After our conversation, my parents left without saying much. I thought that was the end of it, but soon after, relatives started calling me. They were upset, saying I had humiliated my parents and that I'd changed since coming into money. My parents had apparently been telling everyone that I was lording my success over them, despite all they had done for me. I didn't see it that way at all. I was just standing up for what I believed was unfair. So, I decided not to talk to my parents, thinking that if they had an issue with what I said, they should have confronted me directly instead of complaining to the rest of the family. I also didn't bother speaking to the relatives who didn't understand my side of things. It's not like I was invited to my sister's wedding, so I didn't feel any need to contribute anyway. Over the past few days, I've had no contact with my parents or the rest of the family, and honestly, I'm fine with it. I don't think I did anything wrong. But then, 2 days ago, My parents showed up at my place, visibly upset. They told me that because of me, they had been uninvited from Catherine's wedding. I was baffled since I haven't even spoken to her. Apparently, when my parents told her they couldn't fund the wedding and needed help from her or her in-laws, she lost it. She didn't want to ask for financial help from her in-laws because it would make our family look bad. She's usually spoiled and entitled, but I can see her point here. If my parents weren't sure they could cover the costs, they shouldn't have committed to it in the first place. I actually think she and her fiancé should have paid for the wedding themselves, given his family's wealth. But since my parents made a promise, they should have followed through. So, I told my parents that I had nothing to do with this mess. They brought this on themselves, and they only have themselves to blame. While uninviting them from the wedding might have been an overreaction, it's not surprising given Catherine's history. They're the ones who let her become this way, not me. My parents refused to hear me out, insisting that if I had just loaned them some money instead of holding on to old grudges, they wouldn't be in this mess. I felt it was unfair for them to blame me, so I asked them to leave, and they did. But they didn't stop there. Now, the entire family has turned against me, accusing me of being selfish and heartless. I honestly don't think I did anything wrong. But still, am I the bad guy for refusing to help with my sister's wedding because my parents can't afford it? Update 1. I've decided to go no contact with my entire family. It's crazy, but both my mom's and dad's sides of the family are united against me, except for my grandparents. My mom's parents are no longer around, but my dad's parents have been trying to keep the peace, though even they're getting tired of the drama. The family has had differences in the past, but it seems their dislike for me has brought them together. At least I've managed to do something good for them. I've blocked everyone, and I really don't want any more drama. Someone in the comments suggested that maybe the real reason they're all against me is jealousy, and I think that's a valid point. I don't want to brag, but I'm doing better than most of my family, and I don't think they can handle it. Growing up, I never took anyone's advice. Most of them told me to get a business degree and take over my dad's store, thinking that was the future instead of working with computers. Well, that's how I make my living now, and I'm more successful than most of my cousins. It's not just jealousy. Their parents seem to resent me too. It doesn't make sense because families should be happy for each other's successes, but that's never been the case. It makes me sad sometimes, but I've realized some people are just like that. I bet my parents are enjoying the fact that everyone's against me, blaming me for getting them uninvited from my sister's wedding. We haven't spoken since they last accused me of ruining their relationship with her, which I still don't understand. My grandparents aren't speaking to them either, as they've taken my side. It shows how ungrateful my parents are because my grandparents have helped them so many times in the past, yet they don't seem to remember that. Honestly, I'm glad I didn't help them out when they asked. I'm sure they would have forgotten about it in the future, taking it all for granted. It's about time someone taught them a lesson, even if it's someone as difficult as Catherine. Update 2. Something funny happened yesterday. I was busy, so I couldn't share it right away, but Catherine came to visit me after I got home from work. I was surprised because we haven't spoken in 5 years, and our relationship is far from good. I figured she was there to talk about her wedding, especially now that our parents aren't invited. I'm pretty sure she needs money, but she was smart enough not to start with that. Instead of diving right into what she wanted, Catherine started by apologizing for her past behavior. She said she was beginning a new chapter in her life with her upcoming marriage, and wanted to extend a formal invitation to me as a way to make amends. She admitted that she regretted being a brat, though she blamed our parents for never correcting her behavior, which led her to believe she was acting normally. Now that she was older, she recognized how terrible she had been and was trying to make things right, starting with me because, as her brother, I had endured the most. I listened to her, And when she finished, I told her I was glad she had finally realized her mistakes and apologized. But I knew there was more, and I waited patiently for what was coming next. Sure enough, she soon brought up how our parents had treated me unfairly, claiming they had been telling everyone I was selfish and heartless for not contributing to her wedding. She tried to butter me up, saying I was right to refuse because they never supported me after I turned 18, and that it wasn't my responsibility to bail them out, especially given our strained relationship. I could see where this was going, so I waited for her to get to the point. Finally, she confessed that after our parents were uninvited from the wedding, they withdrew the funds they had promised her. She complained about how unfair it was, since they had committed to covering some expenses, and now she was too embarrassed to tell her fiancé that his parents would have to foot the entire bill. That's why she was there, to ask if I would help her out just this once. She promised to be grateful for the rest of her life, and even offered to sign a contract to ensure I'd get the money back by the end of the year. She was desperate to avoid the embarrassment of explaining this mess to her fiancé. I found it interesting that she was so eager to promise repayment, and I even considered getting it in writing. But I told her I needed time to think about it since, despite her apology, our relationship was still strained. I expected her to understand, but instead, she accused me of being difficult and said I was acting too high and mighty, especially since she wasn't asking for much as my sister. That was rich, considering we hadn't had any relationship at all for the past 5 years. It was clear to me from the start that she came just to ask for money, and her apology wasn't sincere. I told her she was just like our parents, selfish and only looking out for herself. Naturally, she got angry and started yelling at me. But I'm not my parents, and I don't have to put up with that. I told her to leave my house immediately, and when she refused, I grabbed her arm and forced her out. She threatened to call the cops for attacking her, but I didn't care. She eventually left, and though I was pretty angry at first, now I just find the whole thing ridiculous. I'm not letting it bother me anymore. Update 3. A couple of weeks have passed since my last update, and I assumed that with all the tension between my sister and me, her wedding invitation had been revoked. But today, I was surprised to receive an invitation in the mail. Confused, I decided to reach out to her. At first, she didn't respond, but a few hours later, she called me back. She was curt when I thanked her for the invite, so I asked her what was going on because I was genuinely puzzled. She explained that she meant her apology that day and was really trying to be a better person now. She had also managed to arrange the wedding funds on her own, so she didn't need anyone's help anymore. She assured me that her apology wasn't just an act to get on my good side because of my money. She was sincere. She also mentioned that our parents had made her realize how bratty she had been in the past, and she was working hard not to become like them. Curious, I asked if she planned to invite them to the wedding as well. She clarified that, contrary to what they were telling everyone, she never actually uninvited them. She was just really upset with them for putting her in a difficult spot. Apparently, it wasn't as if my parents didn't know what my sister wanted for her wedding. She had warned them from the start that her plans were grand and likely beyond their budget, but they insisted they could handle it. After all their big talk, it would have been humiliating for her to admit to her in-laws that her parents couldn't afford what they had promised. What really bothered her was that they hadn't thought things through and were more focused on competing with her in-laws. When she got angry, they decided she didn't want them at the wedding and uninvited themselves. She hadn't told them to stay away. They just assumed it. It's pretty messed up that instead of talking to us directly, our parents chose to spread their grievances to everyone else. They did the same thing with me, and now they're doing it with her. It's frustrating to see them paint us as the bad guys without even trying to clear the air. After all the awful things they've said, it's hard to feel motivated to resolve things with them. And if we don't, they'll just find a way to blame us again. They always want to play the victim, and I'm glad my sister is finally seeing through that. Catherine told me that the rest of the family hasn't cut her off like they have with me, but she's still undecided about inviting them. They seem to be siding with our parents, but while they've been outright nasty to me, they've only tried to justify our parents' actions to her without directly accusing her of anything. I think it might have something to do with my parents being too proud to apologize, but not too proud to rely on their kids in the future. With my grandparents no longer helping them, they probably feel the need to keep Catherine on their side, so they're leaving that door open. That's just my guess, though. I'm not entirely sure what's going on. What I do know is that they're treating Catherine very differently than they treated me, which is sad, but not surprising. At least Catherine is starting to see the truth now, and if she's genuinely trying to be a better person, I think I'll give her a chance. After our phone call, she also apologized for her outburst the other day and said she'd really like me to be at the wedding. She mentioned that someone from the family should be there. I haven't decided yet if I'll go, but I'm giving myself a couple of days to think it over. It's not easy to rebuild a relationship that's been neglected for 5 years, but I don't want to be the kind of person who holds on to grudges forever. That would just make me miserable. I've talked this over with my grandparents, and they said if I decide to go, they'll attend as well. Initially, they weren't sure if they wanted to go, but given the situation, they might reconsider since Catherine seems to be rethinking her relationship with the rest of the family. Update 4. Yesterday, I attended Catherine's wedding, or more accurately, I walked her down the aisle. Our parents didn't apologize or even reach out to her before the wedding, which is why they weren't invited. Catherine was upset about it in the days leading up to the wedding, and asked if I would walk her down the aisle, because she needed someone there for emotional support. I agreed right away, because no matter what happened in the past, no one deserves to be treated like this by their own parents over a petty fight. I always knew it would be easier for my parents to cut me off emotionally, because Catherine was the golden child. But seeing this side of them, realizing they were too proud and egotistical to repair their relationship with the one child who had always mattered most to them, was a new low. They're partly responsible for Catherine's past behavior. As parents, it was their job to guide her, but they never cared enough to correct her actions, which turned her into a spoiled brat. I'm not saying it's entirely their fault, but they could have done something, and they didn't. Anyway, when Catherine asked me to walk her down the aisle, I agreed, and she seemed genuinely grateful. Even the few family members she invited declined, probably because they want to side with my parents and stay wrapped up in the drama. I managed to get my grandparents to attend, and before the ceremony, Catherine apologized to all of us. Her fiancé also apologized for how he treated me years ago. Catherine had told him everything about the situation with our parents, and he assured her not to worry about the money. He'd take care of it. That's how things worked out for them, but Catherine nearly broke down before the ceremony because our parents weren't going to be there. Her fiancé, our grandparents, and I all encouraged her not to let them spoil such a special day. I wouldn't say everything is perfect now, but we're going to work on it and try to make things better moving forward. I'm really starting to believe she's changed, and when I saw her yesterday, I genuinely felt she was sincere about wanting a fresh start. Some people might not agree with my decision, but I believe